Welcome to the Legally Speaking podcast. You are now listening to season 7 of the show. I'm your host, Rob Hanna. This week, I'm delighted to be joined by Sam Dolce. Sam is an attorney and VP of Business Development and Marketing at Milestone, an innovator in post-settlement solutions. Milestone's Pathway platform is making mass tort distribution more efficient for law firms. Sam received his Juris Doctor from the State University of New York Buffalo Law School. Prior to working at Milestone, Sam worked as a pro bono attorney at debt clinics. His dedication to public service brought him to Milestone, where his focus is on proving civil justice for the plaintiff. Sam is an expert in streamlining post-settlement processes and is passionate about justice for survivors. In 2012 and 2023, Sam was elected to the National Trial Lawyers Top 40 Under 40 in the state of New York. So, a very big warm welcome, Sam.
Thanks, Rob. It's a pleasure to be here. This is really exciting.
And before we go through all your amazing projects and experiences, we have a customary icebreaker question here on the Legally Speaking podcast, which is, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being very real, what would you rate the hit TV series Suits in terms of its reality of the law if you've seen it?
I mean, 11, obviously. No, I think there's elements of it that are actually pretty accurate, especially when you're talking about the mass tort world. So like we work around a very specific type of the law. And one of the things really good on that is that they do a really good job of, I think, is the personalities. Like the idea that attorneys are people. I feel like a lot of the times in TV shows, it's always just like this like brooding individual and not someone who's like obsessed with their cat. And then when you get into this like mass tort world and you meet all these individual people and their eccentricities, it's kind of like heartwarming in that respect. One of the things they totally miss on the show is a lot of the detail-oriented work that goes into being an attorney. As someone who works around administration of large mass torts, they totally miss that. Like the idea of, trying to figure out how we're going to process 10,000 people through a very complicated court system. I mean, it's not necessarily for the faint of heart. And they definitely depict the late nights that are involved in doing this work, but they don't necessarily depict some of that more detail-oriented, maybe less glamorous, I found the missing document sort of moments that seem to occur every episode.
So with that, what number would you give it? Which is a very good justification, whatever number you choose, given your outlines there.
I would give like a 4. Even a 4.
A 4. Okay. I think you give...
I think it's doing okay. I've met Harvey Specter. That wasn't his name, but I've met that guy like 10 times.
Okay.
That's just being who has the personal driver and all
that. Perfect. Well, Gabriel is a legend. Yeah, no, I like that. Okay, well, let's go on to talk a little bit more about you, Sam. Would you mind telling our listeners a bit more about your background and career journey?
Sure. I always knew I was going to be doing some sort of work like this, right? So my dad was a prominent trial attorney. My mother is a PhD in disability studies. So I was always going to be working on a way to help injured people. I started my career, I worked at a typical personal injury firm, my caseload and haggling with insurance adjusters. And anyone who does that type of work will immediately know where the type of place I work. And honestly, I didn't really feel that inspired by it. I didn't feel like I was making much of a difference. I was approached by the founder of Milestone, and he sort of presented this idea that, we could impact how billions of dollars move every year and how people are actually able to interact with that. And so we sort of started with this concept. You can do settlement planning on an individual level with one person, but no one's really ever attempted to do that on a mass level. And so our company developed this technology so that, no matter how many people are settling a case, we're able to make sure that they get individualized care. Because a lot of the time, the money that people receive from these large mass torts, it'll be the, largest amount of money that family will see in generations. And what happens with that money is significant. And so we need to be better as an industry. We can't just be mailing out checks. And so our company started developing the technology to meet that need. So within my own career, I saw it from a very early age of there needs to be something more here, just growing up in that law firm environment. And then upon graduating law school and working as an attorney, I saw, there's a real need. And so that's sort of how my path led me into this work. But if you would have told me upon leaving law school that I was going to be working in a settlement administration company, I would have looked at you like you're crazy. Really proud of the work we're able to do. And I honestly think that, I know we make a difference in thousands of people's lives because I get the letters, right? And it's uplifting.
No, absolutely. And it's amazing work that you're doing at the company, that's for sure. In terms of some of our listeners who may be less familiar, can you tell us a little bit more about what mass tort administration actually is?
Certainly. So I know there's attorneys of all sorts and even people who aren't attorneys who listen to the show. So just to give a little bit of an outline, 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, there's the mass production of all sorts of instruments. There's the beginning of the environmentalism movement. I mean, I'm from Western New York, so I immediately think of Love Canal, right? Where, which, if you follow American history, is one of our big environmental disasters. Poisoned an entire neighborhood with chemical, dumpings from multiple corporate entities. And so the legal system needed a way to be able to treat these mass wrongs. And so you couldn't bring all these lawsuits as single lawsuits. And they also don't work in the class action context because each individual case is its own facts, right? Everyone's impacted differently. And so what do you do? And that's really the origins, and this is a very, very macro historical lens, but that's the origins of what we call the JPML, which is the home of multi-district litigation, where you can bring tens of thousands of lawsuits, but it's seen by a single court. They do bellwethers where they test a few of the cases, and then they reach a mass settlement with all of the different claimants. And these are typically known by everyone in the United States and Britain, all around the world, right? These are all known under the headlines that we see, right? J&J settles this case for billions of dollars. 3M settles this case for billions of dollars. How does that actually work? And that's what our company does. So on the back end of those cases, someone needs to figure out who's getting what, how they're getting the money, and when they get the money, what's going to happen. And for the longest of time, it was done the same way they've done things in the class action industry, where they get everyone's names in a registry and they just start mailing checks. You can imagine a lot of these setups are done through organizations with technology from the mid 90s. We're talking like emailing Excel spreadsheets around and, stuffing envelopes. And, most of the companies that we compete with have very, very large mail. And we came into the space sort of with the hope to, for lack of a better term, disrupt that. The idea that, we can turn this into a digital medium. We produce like real style animated videos to sort of explain to people the different financial benefits that could occur, give them resources they can call, and making it all mobile friendly. Because most of the people that interact with these types of lawsuits, they'll have access to the internet and they likely will have a smartphone. And so if we can do that with 70, 80% of the people involved in lawsuits, then the other 10 to 20%, you can really have more of an individualized effort, right? And you can actually reach them. Also, we can provide things for the unbanked and underbanked. And there's all sorts of financial justice issues like in the balance here. But the basic idea here is you have these large corporate powers producing large catastrophic harms, and they're being reached through civil settlement. What happens with all those dollars afterwards? That's what our company.
Yeah, and it's really, really important work that you're doing as well. And, obviously we're partnering with Clio, and, really legal tech to utilize for good is absolutely something I support in terms of transforming the legal experience for all, which is obviously Clio's mission and one that we absolutely support. And this is obviously a great example of some leading technology that's doing good, right? So I want to talk a bit more about...
Yeah, just to build on that for really quickly. I mean, this whole legal process for the actual individual going through it produces its own traumas. Like, it's terrible, right? Like you're dying of cancer and yada, yada, yada. And like tools like Clio, right, which help produce better communication with the client, better document management. They don't have to tell their story 10 times because there's already a timeline built into the case file, right? How can we actually build those same sort of technologies into the disbursements? And so I would say companies like Clio have helped inspire the creation of companies like mine to really meet it on that next level.
Absolutely. And I want to talk about tech, not to get enormously techy, but it's important because you've touched on it. But, it's good for people to get an understanding because it's the world we're moving into and people need to be educated on this. You have a leading technology platform that's digitizing the mass tort, the post-settlement process. So, talk us through how it works. How does the Pathway platform work?
So I'll explain from the UX perspective, right? So
Yes.
that's the user experience. What it looks like is I'm going to use an actual real case example. A case resolving right now is Juul. So that's the e-cigarettes, right? But 8,500 people involved. We're working with a number of the law firms in that litigation. I'm not going to say specific. In that resolution, the vast majority of those people between the ages of 18 and 20. That means they're likely in school. That means they're likely experiencing different forms of benefits from the government. So if for school, for example, they fill out their FAFSA, they might get Pell Grants. This is the United States programs, but it's pretty much student aid, helps you pay for college. If you receive $100,000 and it sits in your bank account, that's an asset, right? And so that would impact your benefits negatively. What our technology does is when those people resolve their settlement, if the firm they're working with is working with us, all those people receive a text message. They'll also receive an email. They'll be able to click on that email link. It'll provide them with a link. They click it, they'll go to a form. And it'll be a DocuSign. We're all familiar with DocuSign technology at this point, where they can list all their different expenses, everything that's happened in their settlement, whether or not they agree to that settlement amount. This is the amount they've already discussed with their attorney. It's more so for data collection. They sign that, we save the form, we keep it, provide to the law firm their case management software, it's a Clio, and then it's their part of their record. Great. That was solved, took 30 seconds. From there, they then go into watch reels. And I call them reels because that's just, it's not the technical name, they're just videos, but we're all sort of familiar with TikTok and reel technology. And so that's what we sort of emulate our videos off of, right? 30 seconds, a minute, maybe a minute 30, basic. Hey, if you have student aid, you might lose those benefits. If you're worried about that, click here. They click there, they go into a scheduling app. They get to see the different settlement planners they can work with. They can pick one, select a time. All of a sudden that pops up as a Zoom calendar for them. At that point, their distribution process is paused until they talk to the fiduciary they need. They meet with that fiduciary, they build a financial plan, they move on from there. If they watch that video and they don't need to do it, they press a big button that says skip. They get a waiver page. Are you sure you want to skip this? They press skip. They go, and then they choose, do they want a Zelle, PayPal, Venmo, whatever digital payment platform is popular. And we're able to do that, different payment platforms in different countries. And so just by adding to have this technology, the whole user experience usually takes approximately 3 to 5 minutes for someone to move through this whole process. And if you think about it, we used to do that through the mail. So that process used to take 2 to 3 months at least. And so you're talking about, a shortening of timeline to help get the money out the door much, much faster. And you're also talking about a higher level of care, like a higher standard for the actual claimant experience. So the technology perspective, like the UX is relatively simple. They get a text message, they click a few buttons, they sign, they watch a video, they go, yeah, I need that, or I don't need that. And then they choose how they get paid.
Yes, that's brilliant. And I'm just such a big fan of this because, technology for good, that's obviously a speed and process and efficiency. And like you say, more secure process. I'm all for it.
Sorry, the old process, you just told them what your address was and they mailed out a check blind, hope that it got there. It's a lot more secure this way. Sorry.
Yeah, exactly. There is a lot more security around it and with encryption and everything else that go with it. But look, you make it sound super easy. It's not. And there's challenges and there's things you have to go along to get there. And I think it's very important people understand the hard work that's been put in before them. What have been some of the challenges you've encountered with Pathway and how have you been able?
If anyone is ever thinking about building a tech platform, which a lot of people do, and a lot of people approach me because we've had a lot of success and we've grown a lot. So I'll have, friends, neighbors, people on LinkedIn, they'll approach and say, what is your best piece of advice sort of thing? And it's due to directly on these challenges, right? Start really small. And I give a world of credit to a number of the attorneys that we started with very early, years and years ago, who helped us sort of develop this concept and allowed us to work with their firm to really do that. I mean, like Pathway didn't just happen overnight. There were a lot of, 10-person multi-party settlements where, hey, we're thinking about testing this. Can we do that? And then doing that and then improving it every time. At this point, I mean, in the next quarter, we'll be sending out tens of thousands of payments. That didn't just happen. I mean, there were so many little bumps and bruises along the way. One of the case examples I'll give is very early on, we used to get caught in spam blockers a lot, and we didn't really know how to fix that. So for example, you're sending out payments to a ton of school districts. You send out emails to all those school districts saying, hey, you're going to receive a payment. It gets caught in the spam filter. So how do you address that? How do you, build up your own credibility as a distribution engine to not get caught in spam? That in itself was a whole project for a year and a half. And so there's parts of this that you don't even see coming that eventually do come. And there's only one way to really figure that out. And that's sort of by doing these sort of test projects or beta testing is really necessary. I'm really excited because at this point, we're pretty much the only ones who are able to offer this sort of like comprehensive platform. And I'm watching a lot of our competitors like trying to catch up. And I'm really worried they're not doing that beta testing. And like, that's something I always like, whenever I talk to them, I encourage them, hey, this is what you have to do. I mean, especially because there's so much need for this type of technology in the space that not one company can do it all. So I'm kind of hoping, I think it's just going to become the norm where on every mass tort class action settlement, it'll be a digital payment, moving forward, at least in the next 5-10 years.
No, I absolutely agree. It's the way we're moving. You've given some good examples, but I think it's important also, we talk about this in a bit more depth, because as a service provider, what steps is Milestone taking to ensure the integration of technology in the legal industry is balanced with ethical and privacy concerns?
It's a really good question. I mean, especially, I don't know if you're aware of the conversation around mass torts right now, but the advertisers are getting a lot of trouble, TCPA violation. One of the things we have to our advantage is we established qualified settlement fund. We're listed as trustee and fund administrator, and we are sort of working, within the context of some states' laws, we're working as an agent for the law firm. And so we're able to interact directly with them. As far as their personal information and things like that, it's paramount. Protecting that sort of information using encryption. We work around a lot of settlements regarding survivors. We may not even receive their real names. We might be working off of initials because it's such sensitive information. And if you're dealing with, a group of clients that's thousands of people, you might have someone who's a public figure. You might have someone who's a survivor and isn't out about that experience and doesn't want to be out about that experience. And so how do we preserve that data? And so a lot of the times we'll be doing initialing and we'll do other sorts of forms of encryption. I don't want to go too deep into it, but it's there has to be levels of security around every term.
No, and I appreciate that you are doing a lot of work with that and, taking that extremely seriously because, we can get all very excited about these things, but you're not sort of, forgetting the absolute importance of these privacy and ethical concerns. We can't do a show without saying the buzzword of the year, which of course is AI. How do you see the role of AI and automation evolving in the legal field, especially Tort?
So for the legal field generally, there's so much. I'll talk specifically about mass tort administration. Just because, I could go on this for hours. There, within our platform, there's all sorts of automation that's necessary, right? Like you can't do this on a mass scale without having a high degree of automation. And I mean, AI is such a big, broad category of different things that function. But within our process, I would say the most sort of like smart technology we have, AI technology we have, is that automation process. So the idea of you're in that data art center, you're combining all these different fields, worlds, and then you're just building it. Like all of a sudden, 10,000 statements are created in a blink of an eye. And that's being done through a computer that's much, much smarter than myself. I think a lot of this is also having to do with allocations. So that's when you determine who gets how much money, and you're reviewing medical records. Those medical record summaries now more often, those allocations can be produced in summary reports by artificial intelligence. So you can scan like millions of pages of documents, have it summarized into a 10-page report. And so the court-appointed neutral who's reviewing all of that can just review the report. They don't have to review 10 million documents. And so like those sorts of technologies are making our side of the business happen much faster. As you can imagine, reading 10 million documents takes a lot of time.
Yeah, just a bit.
Mass torts generally, I'm really curious to see how that impacts the defense bar. Specifically, a lot of, I went to State University of New York for law school, right? A lot of my friends immediately went and worked at big firms in New York. A lot of their first jobs are, for lack of a better phrase, you're chained to a desk and doing doc review, right? You're just like a billing machine. What are those rules going to look like in the future if AI is able to review those documents faster, and then you're just there to review that work? If those hours are greatly reduced, how does that impact the business model for those large defense firms that have whole rooms of young associates who are just billing doc review hours? That to me is going to be a really big question in our space. So there's all sorts of ways that AI is sort of impacting this. On the administration side, it's a lot for good. You're talking about the ability to use this technology to limit the amount of people work that has to be done, so the distribution process happens that much faster.
Yeah, this is incredible, and this is why I'm such a fan of it, right? Because the speed and the ability to affect change in an industry with AI is like one of the greatest revolutions I think we're ever going to see, and that's why I think it's a super exciting time for the legal world.
So right now with the allocation work, that doc review work, the price of it is still, it's a little bit more expensive to use the AI than do it manually, but the computing power every year becomes less expensive. Like it used to be twice as expensive. That was like 2 years ago. Now it's pretty much the same price, but 2 years from now, it'll be half the cost. And then 10 years from now, so they need to build up that sort of, there's some practical concerns to make sure that it works across, every litigation. But it's definitely getting there. And it's kind of cool to be, be right here while it's all sort of happening. It's one of the things I never thought I'd get to do as an attorney, is be on the cutting edge of anything. Like we work on precedent, but all of a sudden it's like, oh no, we get to build the future. It's kind of fun.
Oh, it's hugely fun, and I'm here for all of it, and I'm excited for all of it. Again, just to go a bit deeper, how does settlement planning and financial planning play into Pathway?
It's a really good question. I mean, it's the main reason why I do it. I can't tell you how many families' living rooms I've sat in and sort of had to build that financial plan after a really traumatic experience. Every mass tort is dealing with somebody who's really been through something. The money is never worth it. I think that's probably one of the biggest mischaracterizations of personal injury law, mass tort, class action. Any of it is the money is never worth it. And these people have been through a lot. The financial planning element of this, a lot of it has to do with that benefit preservation conversation I had earlier. I would say even more of it has to do just with the real human implication. I would say most people in the world are working hard for a paycheck. And that paycheck is usually a couple hundred, maybe a couple $1,000. All of a sudden, we have the responsibility of sending, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars. And if you just mail that check to somebody, that's not necessarily a good thing. That can actually be a destructive force in that person's life. And I've seen this like firsthand. Our responsibility to do, in my mind, as attorneys, is to zealously advocate for somebody, but then also make sure that that zealous advocacy means something. And so when we're distributing that settlement money at the end, if you don't have a planning component to it, like what are you really doing? You can hold a large corporate entity responsible and make them pay billions of dollars, but where does that billions of dollars go? And how does it impact the people that were actually harmed? Like those are separate questions that our legal system isn't really perfectly constructed to answer. And so that's sort of where companies like ours kind of come in, is to sort of try to provide some answers. Like, yeah, if you're getting $100,000 and you're a student and you're worried about your financial aid, you can talk to somebody. You can talk to them for a half hour and sort of build a financial plan and structure those funds so that it won't impact your financial aid. And then maybe when you graduate, you'll have some money to start your business, or maybe you'll have some money to pay a down payment on the house. Those are the types of conversations that we do. And I like to think like each person that we're able to contact to that intimate planning work with, like that's one working family that's going to be a little bit financially better off than we did it. And so it's a complex because it's one-on-one sort of conversations that need to happen thousands of times, right? But it's not like anyone is less important than another. And even if you're getting 30 grand, I mean, $30,000 to most people in the world is, that's life altering. Maybe not life changing, but it's definitely life altering. And so like, how do we approach that? And it's kind of shocking to me that for decades, the approach to that was, yeah, we'll mail them a check. Like, it's not good. It's not. And so like, that's what we're sort of there to answer.
No, and I think it's a really robust answer. And it comes back to the 𝐥𝐢𝐬𝐬𝐭𝐞𝐧𝐢𝐬𝐿 conference I was at earlier this year, where they're talking about the introduction of technology actually going to enable businesses, legal professionals, those within the industry, to be more human focused. And like you're saying, with that approach, with all of this, you can build a more, better relationship, more human connection, and ultimately leave clients happier. And that leads to my next question, which we've kind of been touching on. But what do you hope for clients to achieve from using Milestone?
I mean, my real hope, in like, this has been the stated purpose for years now, is that everyone who's settling a personal injury case, whether it's a mass tort, whether it's part of a class action, that they all are able to have an individualized financial plan. Like, I want to be able to make it the standard. And maybe it's through Milestone. Maybe one of our competitors figures it out better, faster than we do. I don't think that'll be the case, but I just want that to be the status quo, right? The status quo for 5 decades was mail the check, just get them out of here, mail it, right? I want the status quo for the next 50 years after our work here is done, sort of thing, to be, oh yeah, when you settle the case, of course you would sit down with someone and plan your future. You wouldn't just get a check for 150 grand in the mail, right? Like, it's sort of commonsensical, but that's the goal here, is to really leverage that technology to make sure that working people are protected, so that those corporate harms that happen to them, the money they receive because of it, it's not meaningless. It's not just like thrown away. It's not. I mean, I have so many horror stories. People who took it and went to the casino. People who took it and put it in the wrong. People who took it and their marriages are ruined, their families are ruined. Like, I've worked with all these people. It's hard. Just getting money doesn't necessarily make it all better.
No, exactly. And I think it's really well said. Your CEO, Amy, was quoted in Law Dragon as having said, "At Milestone, we recognize that business thrives, but all involved when it's treated as a relationship rather than a series of transactions." So, what are your thoughts to that quote?
Well, I adore Amy. She's my partner. She's amazing. She's a great CEO. And I think she kind of hits the nail on the head. I mean, when you're talking about anything in any business, it's based upon the relationship that you build directly with your clients. And whether that's the law firms that we work with, right? And like, we make sure that their businesses are able to thrive because we take on a huge aspect of what their office is attempting to do, but not really able to focus on, right? They're predominantly focused on the litigation, win the case, right? After the case is resolved, they don't have time to do all this stuff. They have to go back and win the next case, right? And so like, that's really, there's a relationship there, a relationship of trust that we have to build with them over time. But then ultimately the relationship with the end client. One of the things I'm really proud of is, like, if you go on our Google reviews, they're all 5 stars. And that doesn't matter whether they're lawyers we built those relationships with or individual clients, right? And that's really hard to do as a growing company, because especially working with people who are experiencing trauma, right? And like, who have really been through it. A lot of those people, some people would say are at points can be irrational. I would say they're rationally reacting to trauma, but it can be not always the easiest client base to work with. And still they know that, we do those trauma-informed care training to ensure our staff are able to reach their needs, are able to communicate even through or across that trauma, and make sure that, they're going to they have something, right, to build off of. And so I think really, like, her point of focusing in on the relationships, it's something that I don't think we oftentimes see in tech is still the emphasis on being a relationship business instead of, normally it's just like build the latest, coolest thing and make it look sleek and fancy. But it's something that has been really important to our business.
Yeah. And I think, it's evident in the success that you're having. I want to look forward with the next couple of questions before we look to close. How do you envisage the future of mass tort administration considering its ongoing advancement?
It's a really good question. I think it'll be faster, really faster. I mean, there's people who have settled roundup cases 2 years ago and got their payments yet because they're doing this old school way of doing it. So I really think the timelines will be hugely condensed. The other part of this that I hope to see is I think it'll become more about the end user and less about more, for lack of a better phrase, just clearing a queue. Because right now, a lot of the times the feeling within the court system itself is we have so many cases. How are we going to handle? Right? That's the question that's asked. How are we going to handle? And what I'm hoping is we can advance this technology to the point where that's not the question that's asked. The question that's asked is, how are these people going to be impacted? Because that's really, the reason why we're asking the first one is on necessity, right? It's we don't have the current framework to meet this huge need. So how are we going to handle it? But if we can figure out how we handle it, we can build the technology so that that's not the question. It's how will these people be impacted? That's where we need to get. So that's my hope for the future of mass tort administration.
Yeah, and I absolutely love that, and we as a show fully support that too. Okay, what plans do you have for Milestone, sort of in the near future? What can you let us in on?
Ooh, do you want to be the first to know? A lot of this is not public. This isn't even. I'm not even sure if I'm allowed to share. But I think I might. We're working. All right. At some point in 2024, it'll go live. We're kind of. Again, it's important to test things slowly but surely, a little bit at a time. But we will, like, our future will show. There'll be a full client dashboard. So every client and every mass tort that we work on will be able to see everything that's going on with their case, how much money is coming, when it is coming, what their liens were, how the liens were being paid were, whether they're doing settlement planning, if they are doing settlement planning, where their structure is, where their trust is. All that will be in one little dashboard you can access on. That's what we're building right now. And that, to me, will be the real future. And my hope is that, when we work on these bigger, more and more of these large mass torts, that'll become the norm for the client experience. Like if you're resolving in a mass tort, you'll just be getting a text message. You get to click on a link and it'll show you everything that's going on in your case. You get a unique login and you can just go and check up on it. And if there's anyone listening who does mass tort administration, they will tell you that sounds like some outlandish dream. And once I show them how it works, this is not a lie. The administrators who do this work, they start crying. They're like, what? It's beautiful. It's really, we miss a lot of kids' soccer games. And so when you figure out a way to do it properly, do it more efficiently, it means something.
Well, you're passionate, and I can feel the passion. And, when you found a problem and you really want to be, forever focused on the solution and getting better and having that passion driving through, there's undoubtedly why you're going to stay ahead and continue to do great things with Milestone. Undoubtedly as well, and finally, you would have inspired some people today. So what advice would you have for those looking to move into the mass tort industry?
Oh, it's a good question. Talk to people who know. It's a really, there's a lot of money moving around, especially of late. There's just a lot happening in mass torts. I mean, I've heard people use the phrase, it's the golden age of litigation, the golden age of mass torts happening right now because there's so many large lawsuits happening. If you're a young attorney and you're interested in this world, I would start by reaching out to people who are experiencing it. I welcome to reach out to me or do some research, reach out to anybody else. There's so much happening here. And I mean, if you watch any Netflix documentary about the latest civil litigation project, whether that's, the Ben Crump one, the Ann Andrews, the opioid one. There was just recently one on 𝐥𝐢𝐬𝐬𝐿. I mean, there are lawyers who are making that work happen. And there are people who are on the ground doing that work. And like, that's who we work with. That's the Mass Tort. So like, if you feel really passionate about being part of that, larger change, I mean, my role within it is minuscule, right? But I'm really proud of the fact that I play a role in sort of holding those corporate entities accountable, even if my role is just paying people at the end, right? It's like, you're still a part of that. And there's a real sort of camaraderie around that that's built. So if you're really interested in this world, and start talking to people who are, live it, breathe it, do it every day, you'll start to see that, we're a pretty tight-knit community. And I think we do an okay job looking for each other.
No, I think you do a phenomenal job. And you touched on it there, but more directly, where can our listeners learn more about your career or Milestone? Where can they find out more? If they want to get in touch, what's the best way to contact you? Shout out any social media or website links, and we'll also share them with this episode for you too.
So our general website is www.milestone7th, SEVENTH.com. Seventh, like the Seventh Amendment, or those American attorneys listening, right to a civil trial. You can also always reach me on LinkedIn. It's LinkedIn/Sam Dolce. I think those are probably the two easiest ways. You can, my email's on there. My email's on our website too. We're generally available around. This is such a niche space, but it's such an important. And so I'm really, really excited to be able to share it with you.
Yeah, and we're grateful for you taking the time to share it with us. So thank you so much, Sam. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. Wishing you lots of continued success with Milestone and your career. But for now, from all of us, over and out. Thank you for listening to this week's episode. If you like the content here, why not check out our world-leading content and collaboration hub, the Legally Speaking Club, over on Discord. Go to our website, www.legallyspeakingpodcast.com, for the link to join our community there. Over and out.